For thousands of years, it's been one of the world's great mysteries. Just how were the pyramids built so deep in the Egyptian desert?
A pyramid.
We can't definitively say which was the very first Egyptian pyramid, but Djoser's is certainly one of the first.
The Great Pyramid of Giza is a marvel of ancient engineering. It was built over 4,000 years ago with more than 2 million massive stone blocks. Each of them was as heavy as a large car, and its sides stood almost 500 feet tall and perfectly aligned with the North Pole. Remarkably, it was all finished in 26 years, and historians struggle to explain how, but newly discovered drawings from another pyramid suggest that humans were not alone in this work. So how did it happen, and where did the help come from? Join us as we uncover the truth behind how the Great Pyramid was built. The ancient drawings. To fully appreciate this discovery, we must first understand its origins. It traces back to over 4,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, a time when brilliant men from the Stone Age carved colorful stories about their experiences, cultural history, and unique opinions of how the universe worked. Their stories were carved into the walls and tombs of Egypt for thousands of years with beautiful symbols and pictures later known as hieroglyphs, and the stories they told were remarkable. The carvings were used to keep sacred stories and traditions for over 3,000 years. But over time, people forgot how to read them, and centuries passed without knowing what they meant. That was until one in particular was found in the late 19th century by explorers working under Egyptologist Flinders Petrie, and you won't believe what they found. You see, Flinders and his team were exploring the ancient temple of Seti I, which was located about 7 miles west of the Nile River at a place called Abydos. They went there to study the ancient stories and myths related to an ancient pharaoh, but what they found was much more surprising. Deep inside the ancient temple and carved in its ceilings and walls were beautiful images of things that should not have existed in 2000 BC. We are talking about old depictions of machines that come too close to modern helicopters, early planes, and even fictional spaceships. Keep in mind that these hieroglyphs were discovered at least 3 decades before the first practical helicopter in the world had taken off in 1939. Decades later, newer explorers took pictures of these carvings, and experts who saw them later almost believed that the photos were fake images cut out of a comic book. The historians were even more shocked when it was confirmed that the pictures were real, and for good reasons. After all, nothing close to these things could have existed over 4,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, right? Well, most experts agreed with this and tried their best to come up with a different explanation for what these hieroglyphs were about and why these old depictions came very close to a lot of things we know today. But many decades passed, and not one expert could come up with a good enough explanation for why these ancient carvings showed pictures of things that almost time traveled from the future. During the 90s, one explorer named Eric von Daniken learned a lot about these pictures and wrote a book about them. His old book, titled Chariots of the Gods, had grown very popular during that time, and his answers to the big problem were remarkable. In his book, Eric argued that these carvings and the images were too accurate to be denied as a coincidence. He suggested that the ancient Egyptians who drew them either saw advanced technology or were guided to draw them by beings from another world. Other images popped up during that time that also got a lot of attention. One of them, which was obtained from another Great Pyramid, had drawings of powerful men carrying the large stones used to build the largest structures in ancient Egypt. Unlike the ones found in the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep or the paintings found in the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt that showed multiple men pulling the large bricks, these old carvings showed large human-like beings carrying entire blocks on their own. This was very important because no human alive today can carry one of those bricks. We know this because most of these limestone and granite blocks weighed at least 2.5 tons. This is about the same weight of a large car, yet the carvings from the ancient temple show single human-like figures lifting these large and heavy bricks on their shoulders and backs. As the best bodybuilders today would tell you, doing this would have required a level of strength far beyond what the average person is capable of.
The so-called gods behaved themselves as today's ethnologists would do.
For these reasons, Eric von Daniken was convinced that powerful aliens helped the ancient Egyptians build the pyramids. Many found this interesting and all, but what did the experts have to say about it? Let's just say they weren't very supportive. Most of Elrich's claims were publicly addressed in 2014 by Dr. Michael Heiser, a historian who also studied the ancient carvings to know how they came about. And what explanation did he have for us? Well, this was where it got interesting. Dr. Heiser and many modern scholars believe the original drawings from Seti's time were overwritten not long after by his son, Ramses II. As the centuries passed by, the plaster covering the original carvings faded away, and this caused the overlapping images to form the strange depictions we have today. According to Dr. Heiser, the depictions we see today aren't what the ancient Egyptians had in mind, and it shouldn't be our general conclusion today. This was the view many scholars believed at the time, and it quickly became the general narrative for most experts. But there were very obvious problems with it. For one, the shapes of these carvings are too close to the modern depictions of vehicles we have today. Secondly, there are still a lot of things about the pyramid that we still don't know. And there is also no proof from history that a random process could have led to images as clear as what we have. All the images look like something the ancients wanted to put there all along, not simply an accident of gradual erosion that happened over thousands of years.
Whereas at Abu Rawash, not very much of the pyramid is there. It's not possible for us to see where the king was buried. Here, we can do that.
Dr. Heiser and most other experts today teach that the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids with simple tools like ramps and levers. On the surface, this makes sense. After all, we have proof today of how ancient workers lived near the pyramids and moved stones with wooden sledges in wet sands to make the work faster. But what this fails to answer is how very similar images of aliens lifting heavy stones were found in other ancient cultures like the Mayans and Sumerians. These were ancient people who closely studied the stars, and some of their discoveries are documented and studied by experts at NASA. These and many other cultures tell stories of powerful gods coming down from the sky to help primitive humans build some of the greatest ancient wonders we still have today. Even trusted experts back then, like Joseph Davidovits, who openly disagreed with Erich von Däniken on a lot of things, admitted that the Great Pyramids are such a mystery that even modern tools couldn't be built very easily. Speaking of difficult structures, let's take a closer look at the pyramids. Unsolved problems with the pyramids. The biggest wonder among these ancient structures is the Great Pyramid of Giza. By modern thought, the Great Pyramid covers more than 10 football fields and is over 40 stories tall. The sides of this great monstrosity are almost equal, and the margin of error between the sides is less than the width of your hand. The sides and angles match almost perfectly with the 4 cardinal points: east, west, north, and south, and the margin of error is less than 2 decimal places. Building something so accurate over 4,000 years ago is like pointing an arrow several miles away and hitting the spot. Each of the stones is as heavy as a large car, and the biggest ones weigh up to 80 tons. To put that in perspective, it's like stacking 16 elephants on top of each other, and yet there are over 2.3 million blocks in the pyramid. Building something like this today would be very difficult, and yet the historical records tell us that it took less than 26 years to build this monstrosity. This feels impossible with the technologies experts claimed they used back then. If we do the math, then it means workers placed one block every 3 minutes or so, and they had to have worked non-stop day and night without taking a break. Even the most powerful cranes we have today would struggle to achieve this feat in 26 years. To explain this, famous architects like Jean-Pierre Houdin suggested in 2007 that the structure be built with an internal ramp. He believed there was a spiral tunnel inside the pyramid used by workers to move the stones upwards as the structure grew higher.
The burial chamber of Khufu is still hidden inside the pyramid.
But what the internal ramp looked like, or how these inside spirals work so well, is still up in the air. Because of this, renowned Egyptologist Mark Lehner studied the pyramids to know what happened. After years of close study, Mark argued that the ancients used simple tools and a large number of slaves to make it work. With thousands of workers taking shifts every few hours or so, building the Great Pyramid in less than 30 years would have been quite easy. Zahi Hawass, a known expert and archaeologist, also agreed with this. The expert was sure about this because he and his team were the ones who found proof that the workers lived close to the pyramids as they were built. According to him, these slaves were well-fed and took pride in their work, and those were the motivation they needed for something as remarkable as this. As for how the pyramids were aligned so perfectly with the 4 cardinal directions, most experts agree that the ancient Egyptians used the stars to make their blueprints. They believe this because the ancient Egyptians saw the stars much differently back then. To avoid any error, the ancient Egyptians used the Orion constellation, a group of stars that played a very important role in their stories and myths, And that explains why the Great Pyramid's sides align very well with the exact positions of the various points. These explanations tried to explain away the big mysteries without adding anything unbelievable. And as a result, they failed to answer some of the most important questions. For example, if Jean-Pierre Houdin was right in saying that the ancient Egyptians used straight internal ramps to build the pyramids,
This became the way the Egyptians did it. But we also know that Djedefre was using granite to case his pyramid.
how did these big tools fit into the curved and spiral path that led to the top from the inside? Also, the suggestion that the ancient Egyptians used the Orion Belt to build the pyramids almost feels like a stretch when we still aren't sure of how the workers could have done it with the primitive tools they had. Simply put, the Great Pyramid is far too advanced to explain away by the natural explanations behind ancient Egyptian technology. Many aspects of how it was built are still a mystery that has puzzled historians even to this day. Because of this, many today consider the wild theory of powerful, intelligent beings visiting Egypt during ancient times. As wild as it sounds, it is worth looking at, especially since it answers most of the mysteries we have today. On top of that, the pyramids aren't the only structures that hint at the possibility of aliens working with humans in ancient times. Located in the Saqqara necropolis near Memphis is another mysterious marvel that has puzzled historians and archaeologists for centuries. Stay with us as we unravel everything we know and much more. The Serapeum of Saqqara. Way back in early 1850, a French archaeologist named Auguste Mariette was looking for a lost temple located someplace near modern-day Cairo. Along the way, he noticed a collection of artifacts underneath the sand that seemed to be leading somewhere. As he dug deeper, Auguste found a hidden entrance leading to many deep tunnels and chambers under the desert sands. You won't believe what he found. These buried places match the stories told through sacred writings passed down thousands of years ago. One of them told me about this location, which is known today as the Decree of Canopus. According to the 2,000-year-old document, sometime in the 14th century BC, one of the most important gods worshipped in Egypt was the Apis bull. This powerful beast was believed to be the messenger of another god named Ptah, and for that reason, the bull was honored as if it were a human king. But that wasn't all. During the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, this sacred animal lived in a grand temple and ate the finest food. The bull had special priests who took care of it every day, and they respected it so much that the day of its death felt like a disaster for the entire land of Egypt. As a final form of respect, the priests who took care of the bull wanted it to be buried in an underground temple. Work began during the reign of Ramses II at the sands of Saqqara, and this underground temple later became known as the Serapeum of Saqqara. With every generation came a new bull that was worshipped by the priests as a messenger of the gods, and each time the bull died, it would get mummified and buried in the Serapeum. This practice continued until the 6th century BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Psamtik I. This is how the story goes according to a vast majority of scholars who studied Egyptian history, and when we accept this explanation, the stories told by the sacred writings almost make a lot of sense. But it all breaks down when we take a closer look at what lies inside the underground temple.
Ropes would have run down these slots. Those ropes would have controlled.
Deep inside the chambers of the temple were 24 massive stone boxes, and each of them was over 10 feet tall, 7 feet wide, and almost 15 feet long. Each of them weighed over 5 elephants, with some of them getting as heavy as 70 tons, with the lids of these graves alone weighing almost 30 tons. These graves were made of hard stones like granite and basalt, and their surfaces were very smooth and accurate. Over the years, as newer explorers came to observe the underground chambers, many questions popped up along the way. How were these massive stones built and moved into this underground location? How were they made in ancient times with so much smoothness and accuracy? The thing is, based on their interpretation of the sacred writings, most experts believe the ancient bulls were buried in these graves. But was that the case? If so, then why were most of these boxes either found empty or without the proper inscriptions? Why were they too large and heavy for something that simple? Keep in mind that even though the sacred bulls were buried with a great level of respect by the priests, as the records say, it was still too much for beings that served only as important messengers for the gods. For better context, not even the sacred graves belonging to some of the greatest pharaohs in history remotely came close to these. And then comes the other problem. Some of these graves were found open, while some others were closed and empty. Only a few of them had remains of sacred bulls. And the nature of the remains goes against most of the things recorded through the sacred writings. Firstly, the few bones they found looked as if they were burned and not mummified. You see, very important people back then were embalmed before they got buried.
Over there, you see my colleague over there?
And the same thing applied to sacred beings like the Apis bulls. Secondly, typical graves of sacred beings in the past always had inscriptions on the boxes. These inscriptions were often used to identify who or what was in the graves and give glory to the gods, so whatever was inside would pass freely into the afterlife without problems. But only a few graves in the Serapeum of Saqqara have these inscriptions on them, especially the large black ones. This adds another layer to the already confusing mystery, and because of this, a few experts believe these graves were only symbolic and used to honor the memories of the much older heroes and gods of Egypt, whose bodies could no longer be found back then. These graves were only opened in later generations, for other reasons, they say. For what reasons exactly? Nobody knew for sure, and this led some people to conclude that these graves were used as part of some unknown technology. When this technology stopped working, later Egyptians started using the graves to bury sacred animals. This was where the theory of ancient aliens came in, but experts like Dr. Michael Heiser have refused to believe this. He says that there is no evidence in the area pointing towards ancient technologies. To him, giving credit to unknown aliens with advanced technologies feels almost disrespectful to the creative genius of the ancient Egyptians and the amount of work they put into these structures. He says that there is a much better explanation for all of it. Heiser insists that it has nothing to do with aliens, but rather a gradual development of skills and techniques in ancient Egypt. These exceptional skills are what led to the ancient wonders of Egypt, some of which are still standing today. If this is true, then what happened to these skills and technologies? If these techniques were able to produce such great wonders that still boggle the most brilliant minds alive today, then how could they suddenly become lost in history? Surely such wisdom and knowledge behind such a great level would have at least been written down and taught through generations. After all, the ancient Egyptian priests are remembered as keepers of knowledge who loved writing all the details of buildings, stars, and their religious rituals. By writing about how the pyramids were built, the name and legacy of the great ruler who brought the pyramids into existence
This burial chamber, maybe 3 meters inside,
would be forever known in complete detail, just as he always wanted. People would not just hear and respect his name for thousands of years, but also appreciate the great genius and wisdom granted to him by the gods. But of course, we don't have that information today. This begs the question, if the scholars are right, then what happened to all this information? Well, the answers are quite tragic, as we shall see. The Great Library of Alexandria. In 331 BC, Alexander the Great, a young conqueror who took over most of the known world, founded a large and beautiful city in northern Egypt called Alexandria. Over 40 years after he died in 285 BC, the people in this city started worshiping the Muses, known to many back then as the 9 beautiful goddesses of the arts. To honor these goddesses, the richest scholars in the city built a large learning institution in Alexandria. This ancient school grew so famous that the Einsteins and Newtons of those days traveled from all over the world to study in this institution. There, they wrote all they learned about the natural world in sacred scrolls made of papyrus. From the advanced architecture of the ancient pyramids to entire courses in basic arithmetic and advanced lessons in herbal medicine, this ancient institution had it all. The scrolls they collected became so many that the scholars needed to build a special library to keep them safe. Under the strict orders of King Ptolemy II, hundreds of workers began to build the library for these scrolls. But unlike what the scholars had in mind, King Ptolemy wanted the library to collect and store all the knowledge in the world. He wanted Alexandria to become the largest hub of learning and culture in the ancient world. To make this happen, he sent agents to buy the most sacred books from all over the globe. This effort was a huge success, and among the scrolls the agents brought back were the earliest and most accurate copies of Homer's Greek mythology, the ancient mathematics of Pythagoras, the medical courses of Hippocrates, and the oldest Greek copies of the Old Testament. At times, the scholars and scribes got so greedy that they would often borrow books from visitors, copy them, keep the originals, and return the copies. And in less than a century, the library's collection grew from less than 100 writings to over 100,000 scrolls. Among the brilliant scholars the library copied from was Eratosthenes, the Greek mathematician who calculated the Earth's circumference on his own, and Aristarchus of Samos, the first person who suggested our planet was a round body that orbits the sun. Both writers compiled their work in the scrolls stored in this library, and they were written long before 200 BC. Through this library, the ancients had a deep understanding of medicine, and they were so good at performing surgeries and developing herbal solutions to the worst medical issues. So much so that several sick people with incurable illnesses borrowed lots of money to afford traveling to Alexandria so they could get cured. By that time, the astronomers had already mapped out the stars and created accurate calendars that come very close to what we all use today. It was a great time in history to be a scholar, but sadly there was trouble on the horizon. The problems began in 48 BC during a war in Alexandria. Julius Caesar ordered his soldiers to destroy the ships at the harbor with fire. This fire quickly got out of hand and destroyed a huge chunk of the library's collection. Things got worse later on in 275 AD, when the city was invaded by multiple enemies and was set on fire on more than one occasion. The final nail in the coffin was set in 391 AD, when Bishop Theophilus of Alexandria ordered his priests to destroy the final temple that hid most of the scrolls that were once stored in the library. That was how all the scrolls got destroyed, and thanks to how greedy the ancient scribes were, they did their best not to copy the scrolls in their collection to keep in other places. They wanted the Great Library of Alexandria to be the only place where the information was kept. So when it got destroyed, there was no way to recover the information, as most of the writers were long gone. What made it so painful was that the details of how the pyramids were built were recorded in this library. Aside from that, countless original autographs of literature, science, and history got lost forever. Thanks to this, much of the knowledge about ancient times and civilizations will always remain a mystery. It was a huge blow to the scholars of the ancient world, and humanity never recovered from it until the scientific revolution of the 16th century. That was when we began to rediscover most of what was lost in the ancient library. Our basic knowledge of algebra, the Earth's circumference, steam power, human anatomy, and advanced medicine had to be rediscovered by later geniuses like Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein. Other things like how the pyramids were built and how his early water-powered robotics worked back then are still a mystery. With that said, stay tuned as we finally address the elephant in the room. Did aliens build the pyramids? Based on all we've discussed in this video, it almost seems like the alien theory, as outlandish as it is, comes close to answering some of the most difficult questions we have about the pyramids today. This is why the outlandish opinion still exists, even though it has been debunked by historians for almost a century. Most modern experts would agree with the notion that the pyramids of Egypt would be very difficult to build with today's technology. Moving and placing these stones would be almost impossible, and even though trusted experts like Jean-Pierre Houdin and Mark Lehner have tried to explain how these massive monstrosities came into existence, their answers still leave many questions lingering. The Great Library of Alexandria, which was supposed to give us the answer, was destroyed along with the knowledge we needed. And all the ancient records of advanced skills and technologies, musical breakthroughs and tools for modern engineering were burned away with it. As for the hieroglyphs in Abydos, they show stunning images that look like helicopters, jets, and large spaceships. Yet the best explanation given by the most trusted scholars is that they are simply the results of overlapping symbols that eroded over time. It gets even more interesting when we think of the ancient stories of coming down to Earth in strange vehicles to teach humans a lot of the skills they used to get by in ancient times. And this explanation comes close to explaining how the pyramids were so massive and accurate. It would also explain the images on the ancient hieroglyphs that show large human-like figures lifting the heavy blocks on their backs and shoulders, and how such massive structures were finished in just 26 years. However, this doesn't necessarily make us sure. It is just a theory that easily explains away the hardest mysteries of the past. For all we know, it could just be that the ancient Egyptians were just that smart to begin with, and the only reason we can't learn from them is the great fires that destroyed the Great Library of Alexandria. Either way, scientists and historians are still trying their best to explain how these structures came to be, especially considering how the stones fit so perfectly that not even a razor blade can slide in between them. The biggest problem for the experts is how the pyramids align to the true north, though some of them have tried to explain it through insufficient means that have been disproven by other scholars. Such knowledge was simply beyond our reach, no matter how smart we were back then. So could the aliens have built them like the pictures show us? Only time will tell as more proof comes to light in the coming years. So what do you think? Were aliens truly involved in this progress, or were the ancient Egyptians just smarter than us on every level? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.